Hello. So in this video, I'm gonna walk through with you the basics of the vector devices. And there are three vector devices in the Inspired by Nature pack. They all look basically the same. Some menus are exactly the same, and they all operate off the same principle. So once you understand one, you can kind of use the others. So I won't go super in depth in all the aspects of the device. I'll have other videos going more into depth about certain aspects of the devices. So this will be a general overview and starting to apply the movements to the audio parameters. So before I get into all that, let's talk about what they are. The vector devices all use a particle system. And you can see here, I've added some grains, and we can see these little circles. These are what I'll refer to as particles. And all of them have forces applied to them that make them move. And since they're all about a bit different, where they start, maybe their size and color, they'll have different movements, even with the same forces. And this gives you a variety of movements between different voices. And yes, each circle represents a different voice in the instrument, in the vector instrument. And so far there are three vector devices. One is for a granular synth, one is for an FM synthesizer, and one is for a delay. Here I'll mostly be talking and demonstrating with this granular synth one. So in this context, each of these circles is a grain, is a sample playback voice. Let's have a listen. So we can hear it's just one voice, kind of panning around according to the X position, the horizontal position, and playing back a sample. If I turn up the grains, we can hear more voices. And that's the basic idea behind it. We have multiple, let me turn this down. We have multiple particles that modulate parameters of their correlated voices. And that's true across all the vector devices. For example, the delay, we have also three particles here in the delay. This is vector delay. And so we have three delay lines. Each one of these is a delay line. Okay, hopefully you understand that basic idea of the devices now. So now I'll start to show you more how this is working and how you can work with these devices. So to mention, like I mentioned before, some of the menus for the parameters are exactly the same between all vector devices. For example, this bottom two menus are exactly the same. This is the settings of the particle system, and as you can see in the delay, it's the same. And this is the settings of the forces, the things that move the particles. And as you can see here in the delay, that is also the same. I'll turn this off. And now the next two menus differ. This menu is the menu for audio parameters. Actually, let me show you. And vector delay also has one, but you can see the parameters are a bit different, but the layout is very similar. And they're different, of course, because they do different things. The delay is a delay, and this granular synth is a granular synth, so they'll have different parameters. But the layout is similar. Now you'll notice that the delay doesn't have a fourth menu. That's because it doesn't need one. The grain does, so this one is unique to the vector grain, and this is the menu managing the sample. Now, I won't be going into this for this video because I just want to focus on the basics that are true for all of the vector devices. So just know this top menu in the vector grain is for managing your sample. Now, I mostly want to focus in this menu because I'll have another video talking about these menus and talking about creating movements. So I'll focus on how you can apply those movements to audio parameters and get working with the device. So as you noticed before, and I showed you, the horizontal position of the particle corresponded to the panning of the sound. Now, it doesn't have to be like this. This is because the horizontal position is mapped to the panning parameter, much like you'd map an LFO to a filter or to the panning. You can also map the position of the particles and things about particles to the audio parameters. So you can think of it just like an LFO or an envelope or any modulation source. We're just using the particle attributes as modulation sources. So here in this audio parameters menu, we can see at the top we have the audio parameters for the grain playback. For instance, we have a panning, we have the pitch, we have the size of the grain, we have the start position in the sample. All these things we're familiar with in grain and sample playback. And we also have a filter with a ladder filter option. Now, that's all pretty standard, so I won't get into that. If you have specific questions about small details, there are some manuals available online to really get into the nitty-gritty details. So let's focus down here at the bottom. This is where we'll map the attributes of the particle, such as the position, to audio parameters. So like I said, here we can see at the first knob, it has this little arrows. That means the horizontal or the x-axis position, as compared to the one next to it, a vertical one being the vertical position. So we can see here that underneath we have pan set to the horizontal position. And we can just as easily set it to another parameter, such as pitch. So this is where you can map the modulation to different parameters. And this is the amount, the range of modulation. And it's bipolar, so you can reverse that. Now right is left and left is right. And this holds true across all of these. So now I can map the vertical one to pitch. And just for good measure, I can, now that I'm modulating the pitch, I can set it to a certain kind of scale. Which of course sounds a little strange because it's playing different notes instead of just one note. So I'll turn that off. All right. Now, the maybe less obvious ones are these three. This knob, or this attribute, is the distance from the center. So there's a little dot with the center and an arrow representing the magnitude or distance. So I'll instead map pitch, because it's the easiest to notice, to the distance from center. So now you can see only when it's in the center is the pitch going down, and I can reverse that. Great, and then the one next to it is the velocity. So kind of like the speed or the rate of change. I can map that. Let's do it to pitch again, because it's the most obvious to hear for this video. So as you can hear, as it kind of speeds up again, or changes the rate of its speed from the attractor, the pitch is also changing. And the last one is the mass or size of the particle. So this one's maybe a bit trickier, but and a bit different than the rest, because the size doesn't change, unlike these other ones. So using the size, using the mass or size of the particles is a way to get a static variation between them in case you want each voice to have some difference and that difference not change. So to do that, I'm first going to go into this bottom menu and I'm going to turn up the randomness to the mass. So this will just create more variety of mass between the voices. So now you can see there are some that are big, some that are smaller. If I turn this down, they're all the same size. But now that it's up, some are big, some are small. If I make a new set, we can see that even better. Here's a really good example. So that also affects their movements. So you have a lot of things going on when you change the mass. So now let's again set the pitch to the mass modulation. Now you can hear they all have different pitches, but the pitches aren't changing. That's because the mass or size isn't changing. So if you wanted the particles to all have a slightly different pitch or filter or whatever, it's good to use this mass and for it to not change, you know. So if I create a new set, they're always having a different set of static pitches according to their mass. And if I change the mass here, it will change that value. Great, so hopefully you understand now how these devices are working, how we're taking these information about the particles, such as the position and the speed and the size, and mapping those to different parameters. And by mixing different parameters, we can get a nice variety of effects here. Now let's say you have something you like, but you just want to tweak it a bit. That's what these main parameters out here are for. So we have the scale, we can scale the whole size of the movements. So we can make it smaller, and then we can offset that with these sliders here. And we can change the speed of the whole movement. Every vector device has these main parameters, as well as adding more or less voices. For vector gain and vector FM, since they are instruments, when you hit the 0 amount of voices, we come into MIDI mode. And this allows you to send MIDI notes and create voices. Right now I'm playing MIDI notes. By default, it will repitch the voices according to your MIDI note, although you can turn that setting off here in the audio settings with this piano button. I turned it off, so now the pitch won't be affected by the MIDI notes I play. But it is still affected by the mass, so let me turn that off too. Can change the envelope. And also uniquely to vector, grain, and FM is this lock button, since they generate sound. And that will be enabled once we have some voices. And lock just says that when lock's on, the device won't make sound unless the live transport is running. So this could be useful if you want to stop your live set and everything to become silent. So that is what the lock parameter is for. Delay does not have the lock parameter, as it only works with audio going through it anyway. So there's no need to lock it. Great. So I hope that this helped you get a start in wrapping your head around the vector devices. I will also have a video on the movements, and I may make more in the future about specific settings. Otherwise, you can use the info view or the lessons of the pack or the manual on my website, which I'll throw a link into. Thanks for watching.